Hey everyone! Today we're talking about the rise of the Ottoman Empire. It's a journey that begins in the late 13th century, with a small group of people carving out their place in the chaotic, fragmented landscape of northwestern Anatolia. By the mid-15th century, they had grown into an empire that spanned continents. Sounds incredible, right? Let's get into it. So around 1299, a small political entity known as the Ottoman Principality, or Osman I Beylik in Turkish, was founded in the region of Bithynia. This wasn't an empire yet, far from it. At the time, it was just one of many small states fighting for survival in a region full of competing warlords, tribal leaders, and struggling empires. The Byzantine Empire was still hanging on in the west, though weaker than ever, and the remnants of the Seljuk Sultanate were scattered across central Anatolia, under the watchful eye of the Mongols. Chaos reigned, and the Ottomans were just one of the players in this messy political scene. But what made the Ottomans different? For one, they were adaptable. They didn't rely on just one strategy or one source of power. Instead, they forged alliances, worked with local warlords called ghazis and beys, and embraced anyone who wanted to join their cause, whether they were Turkish nomads, Christians, or recent converts to Islam. This inclusivity gave them a steady supply of manpower and resources, especially for raiding Byzantine lands. Over time, their influence grew, and they began to stand out from the crowd. The leader of this burgeoning principality was Osman I, the man who gave the Ottoman dynasty its name. We don't know much about him. Historical records from his time are almost non-existent. In fact, historians often joke that the early Ottoman period is like a black hole because so little is known about it. What we do know is that Osman led his people with skill and determination. He started minting coins in his own name, signaling a shift in power and laying the foundation for what would eventually become an empire. Fast forward to 1453, and this once small principality had transformed into a centralized imperial state, thanks to leaders like Sultan Mehmed II. Mehmed, also known as the Conqueror, achieved what many thought was impossible. He captured Constantinople. That moment marked a turning point. The Ottomans were no longer just another regional power. They were an empire, one that would go on to rule vast territories across the Balkans, Anatolia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Now you might wonder, what made the Ottomans so successful? Well, it's complicated. There wasn't one single secret to their rise. They adapted to changing circumstances, built strong alliances, and were strategic in their conquests. Some historians used to think that religious zeal, or the idea of holy war, was the driving force behind their expansion. But over time, this theory, known as the Gaza thesis, has been questioned. Early Ottoman warriors weren't strictly Orthodox Muslims, and their motives often had more to do with political and economic gains than purely religious ones. An interesting thing about the Ottomans is how they balanced their identity. They drew from Islamic traditions, embraced Persian culture, and even collaborated with non-Muslims. Some of the key figures in their early history were of Byzantine and Bulgarian origin. This flexibility and openness were part of what made the Ottomans so resilient. And now let's dive deeper into the complexities of this extraordinary transformation. We've seen how a small principality grew into a sprawling empire through strategy, inclusivity, and adaptability. But what about the details, the society, the government, the military, and the culture that sustained this growth? Let's break it down and continue the story. By the mid-14th century, a massive event shook both Anatolia and the Balkans: the Black Death. This devastating plague swept through urban centers and settled regions, wiping out huge portions of the population. However, nomadic groups, like many of the Ottomans' early supporters, weren't hit as hard. This gave the Ottomans a significant edge. As the Balkans suffered from depopulation, the Ottomans began their incursions into the region. The weakened Byzantine Empire, coupled with a shrinking population, made these conquests much easier for the Ottomans. Constantinople itself, once a thriving metropolis, was severely impacted by the plague, accelerating its decline and leaving it vulnerable. Now, during these formative years, the Ottoman government wasn't the centralized powerhouse we often think of today. Back then, rulers like Osman I and his successors depended on alliances and coalitions to maintain control. They worked with tribal leaders, vassals, and local power brokers. Essentially, it was a balancing act. Early on, the Ottomans drew inspiration from other empires, adopting administrative techniques from the Seljuks and military strategies from the Mongols. By the 1320s, they were even producing Persian-style bureaucratic documents, a sign of their growing sophistication. But here's the twist. The early Ottomans didn't have complete control over their frontier warriors, the ghazis. These warriors were the lifeblood of Ottoman military expansion, but they valued their independence. Over time, the Ottoman rulers managed to rein in their power, consolidating authority and laying the groundwork for a centralized state. This process wasn't always smooth. There was resistance, but it was crucial to the empire's survival. One thing that made the Ottomans stand out was their low taxes. This wasn't just generosity, it was smart politics. By imposing lighter taxes, they gained the loyalty of newly conquered populations, many of whom had already suffered under heavy taxation. This approach helped solidify their control over diverse territories. However, as the empire became more centralized in the 15th century, taxes increased, and not everyone was happy about it. Now, let's talk about one of the key innovations that changed everything: the creation of the Janissaries. This elite military force came into existence during the reign of Murad I. Here's how it happened. Kara Halil, an influential figure in the Ottoman court, proposed a system where 1/5 of the captives taken in war were claimed by the state. These captives, often young boys, were converted to Islam, trained rigorously, and became the backbone of the Sultan's army. The Janissaries were loyal only to the Sultan, giving him a personal force that could counterbalance the power of independent frontier warriors. This marked a turning point in Ottoman military and political organization. Around the same time, the Ottomans introduced another innovation, the military judge, or kazasker. This role marked the emergence of a distinct military administrative class, separating the rulers and soldiers from the rest of society. Murad I also began appointing specific leaders as lords of the frontier, signaling a shift in how power was distributed. Murad himself took on the title of Sultan, moving beyond the image of a simple tribal leader and embracing the role of an imperial ruler. By the 1430s, the Ottomans were conducting detailed land surveys to manage taxation and organize their growing empire. These records, called Tahrir defters, were essential for distributing land revenue to the cavalrymen, known as Timariots. Interestingly, these Timariots weren't all Turkish or Muslim. Many came from Byzantine aristocratic families and simply adapted to the new Ottoman system, serving in exchange for retaining control over their lands. Symbolism also played a huge role in cementing Ottoman authority. For example, Ottoman rulers initially stood to hear martial music, a sign of their warrior roots and commitment to frontier battles. But after the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed II ended this tradition. Why? Because by then, the Ottoman ruler wasn't just a frontier warrior. He was the emperor of a vast interconnected empire. Constantinople itself became the new capital, replacing Edirne. This move symbolized the Ottomans' transformation from a borderland principality into a true empire. The city, with its rich Byzantine heritage, now served as the heart of an Islamic empire that blended its frontier roots with imperial ambitions. Militarily, the Ottomans were always evolving. In the early days, Osman's forces relied on mounted warriors for hit-and-run raids. But as the empire expanded, they mastered siege warfare under Orhan and Murad I. Cannons and gunpowder weapons became a game-changer by the 1380s, and by the 1420s, they were a staple in Ottoman warfare. The introduction of handheld firearms and large-scale use of cannons made their sieges almost unstoppable. And then there's the cultural side of things. By the early 15th century, the Ottoman court was actively encouraging literature and art, drawing from the rich traditions of Islamic courts further east. One notable example is the Iskendernimes, a work meant to advise the Sultan on statecraft by portraying his ancestors as ideal rulers. This literary effort wasn't just about storytelling. It was a subtle critique of contemporary leadership, urging a return to the values of the past.